Before we begin talking about exhalation, it's really important to remind ourselves of some of the abbreviations that we use to indicate partial pressures during this process of ventilation, right? Don't forget that PATM is the pressure that we're going to, the abbreviation, that we're going to use for the pressure in the atmosphere, right? We know that the pressure in the atmosphere is about 760 millimeters of mercury, but here in respiration, we usually set it as being equal to 0, and we actually measure things in millimeters of water, right? So we're going to set it as 0. Setting this as 0 allows us to really easily see if we're getting pressures in the alveoli, the intrapulmonary space, or the intrapleural space that are higher or lower than this atmospheric pressure. This really just allows us to easily use positives and negatives instead of always having to subtract from 760. We also defined P-pull, or big P abbreviation PUL. We defined that as the intrapulmonary pressure, or the pressure that is in your alveoli. We also defined P-IP, which was the pressure that is in your intrapleural space. Let's assume that starting out with exhalation, everything's at 0, right? Everything's a homogeneous mixture. Also remember that the intrapleural space is not going to be gaining any gases, right, in ventilation, right? It's just used to create a pressure difference. Okay, so let's quickly diagram exhalation, which, you think is going to be the opposite of inhalation, with a few modifications. In exhalation, the diaphragm moves up. It's a parachute-shaped organ, and in inhalation, it looks more like a flattened parachute. During exhalation, it moves superiorly, making your thoracic cavity smaller. So the external intercostals also relax. There are no other muscles that work on the rib cage, they just relax. And so your squishy and porous inflated alveoli that had a huge volume from inhalation, they all recoil because of the elastic fibers and the movements, the relaxation of the primary muscles of respiration. Right? Remember, the diaphragm and the intercostals are not contracting here, they're relaxing. They are passively relaxing. And so the volume of our alveoli, or the intrapulmonary volume, is going to get smaller. Right? And we know by way of Boyle's law that if the volume gets smaller, then the pressure is going to increase. And in fact, the pressure increases just until it's above 0. When it does that, air will flow down that gradient, right? Air will flow from the lungs through the trachea, up and out into the lower pressure. For both inhalation and exhalation, you are experiencing volume changes in your thoracic cavity. And these changes in volume are creating gradients, and air will always flow down the gradient, right? It's all about the gradient. During exhalation, alveolar surface tension is a good thing. It contributes to your lungs' compliance. It contributes and increases the ability of your alveoli to collapse, lowering their volume, increasing the pressure, and pushing air out of your lungs. To reference the example I used in inhalation about a baby being on a ventilator, in which the vent forcibly expels air into the baby's lungs, like forcibly increases the volume. There's not really need for the ventilator to control the collapse of the baby's lungs. The alveolar surface tension, the thing that we're trying to combat against for inhalation, it actually takes care of exhalation. But this is a baby. It's not like they have a great ability to invoke active or forcible breathing and overcome any type of alveolar surface tension. So, alveolar surface tension seems to be a negative thing when we're talking about inhalation because it's a force that you have to overcome to inflate your alveoli. However, alveolar surface tension is great for exhalation. It's one of the two forces, the other being elastic fibers. It's one of the two forces that encourage your alveoli to collapse passively. And as I said before, it's a love-hate relationship with alveolar tension. You want just the right amount, but not too much or too little. We talked about compliance in inhalation. Let's talk about a little bit in exhalation. For example, scleroderma is an autoimmune disease in which auto-antibodies attack connective tissue of the body. Fortunately, my very best friend's father passed of scleroderma. One of the main areas of attack, it's the elastic tissues in the lungs. So as the disease progresses, the patient is unable to expand their lungs to the correct volume for inhalation because there's all of this sclerotic or scarred tissue that refuses to be elastic. But then again, the lungs are also incapable of recoiling during exhalation to expel all of the carbon dioxide rich air. And that's because the elastin has been attacked. So a patient with this disease experiences low compliance for everything. Overall, the distensibility of their lungs is low. They can neither inflate and their lungs refuse to go back to the original shape if and when they do inflate. But recognize that one aspect of ventilation can be differently used, differently appreciated in inhalation than it is in exhalation. Alveolar surface tension is a great example of that. You want a lot of it in exhalation, you don't want a lot of it in inhalation.